5 minutes after 11 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in this Friday morning. You ever see an accident on the side of the road and you turn your head? You know, that's called rubbernecking, right?
Yes.
And I guess we make fun of rubberneckers because basically, you know, they're being intrigued by something that's not pleasant, you know? Mm-hmm. It's kind of... And I guess we all do it, though. To be probably honest with you, I've done it probably every single time I've passed an accident. The next book we're going to talk about is like rubbernecking. It is. It's not a it's a well-told story, but it's not a story of a good thing. But it's a very fascinating thing. So, gosh, now I've got you curious, right? Todd C. Elliott is on the phone. He has written this book. It is called Axes of Evil, not axis as in the opposite of allies.
Right, exactly.
Axes as in the things you cut down trees with, except in this case, the axes were used to kill people, entire families of people. More than 100 years ago. And there was a couple of eerie, more recent murders as well. Todd is an accomplished author. He's an award-winning journalist, a photographer. He's a contributor to, is it Lagniappe magazine? You'll have to explain what that is.
I don't know how to pronounce it.
Anyway, he's got a lot of writing under his belt, and his book is called Axes of Evil, the true story of the Axeman murders of 1912 in Louisiana and Texas. And in the book, he comes up with an idea of who he thinks is the murderer, even though it was never actually solved.
Yes.
So, with that said, I've got enough information out there that all you rubberneckers are saying, "Yep, you're right. I want to hear what this is about." Todd C. Elliott. Good morning, Todd.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Where are you? Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Covington, Louisiana, and it's pronounced Lagniappe. The magazine that I did work for is called Lagniappe. It's a Cajun French term, and it just means like extra.
Oh,
extra.
okay. And that was going to be my first question. So you live in the area, so this is a story that is kind of from your area, even though I know it goes a long distance.
Right. Well, see, and that's actually what got me interested. I'm fascinated by, sort of odd or unearthed history, especially Louisiana history, because when I was growing up, and it was in the late '90s, I first learned about these murders, these horrific murders, and when I first got into them, they were less than 100 years old. But the main reason I was interested in them was because one of the murders occurred in my hometown, which is in Lake Charles, Louisiana.
Okay.
So I started my research, and this book is actually the result, kind of a culmination of 15 years of research. And I just did this as a hobby for years, but when I would tell my friends what I was working on, it got them interested, and it certainly is a fascinating twisting and turning story.
Yeah. Oh, it is. And the fact that Rob and I have read the book makes us want to ask questions that wouldn't make sense to the listeners at this point because they haven't heard enough. So rather than us asking the questions, let's talk about it's not a story, but let's talk about the book and what you've documented in the book. And then we've got so many questions. I obviously, well, it's not a novel, so you're not really going to give anything away, I don't think, but. Right. So give us the story. When did this start? And I have so many questions. I don't know where to start. So,
sure.
But when does this story start?
Well, for me, it started in Lake Charles, Louisiana, with the murder of the Broussard family, which was a family of 5 in Lake Charles, Louisiana, in 1912. And I first learned about the crime in a book written by an author named Michael Newton, and his book was called Raising Hell, an encyclopedia of satanic crimes and serial killers. So I started with the A's, and there it was, Axe, and under Axe, it was written in encyclopedia form, so I started with the A's, and I learned about the Axeman murders that happened in these small towns across Louisiana and into Texas. It was started in really Rayne and Crowley, the Lafayette area. This is like Cajun country, South Louisiana and Southwest Louisiana, and in Lake Charles. Now, the thing about the Lake Charles crime was it was the only crime scene where the criminal, the killer or the killers, left a visible clue. I mean, there may have been a lot of clues, but the killer left a message at the crime scene in Lake Charles, Louisiana, which was my hometown. And the clue left behind was a biblical quote from the Holy Bible, from the book of Psalms, chapter 9. And the quote said, "When he maketh the inquisition for blood, he forgetteth not the cry of the humble." And I thought it was just strange that a crime that had been considered a satanic crime, the criminal, who was a satanic criminal would be leaving a quote at a murder scene of the Holy Bible, from the Holy Bible, and invoking the name of God and this and that. It kind of struck me as that there was some mystery there, and the further I dug, I found more and more mystery.
Yeah. Now, the conclusions you come to, and we'll let you tell them because I don't know what you want the listeners to know, but the conclusions you come to, are they drastically different than the conclusions of any investigation that was done?
Yeah, because the thing is, there was actually an arrest made in the Lafayette murders in 1911. But after, what I think the story touches on, what we're looking at with my research in this book, is possibly the largest unsolved serial killing in American history. I mean, we're talking about someone who is the American Jack the Ripper.
How many people actually were killed?
By the time from February 1911 to 1912, by the time the Axeman had begun to make his way into Texas, there were already 36 victims, entire families with small children and babies killed from 1911 to 1912 in Texas and Louisiana alone. And 36, I mean, that's a death toll. That's a number that the Axeman committed in a short period of time, and that rivals any Jeffrey Dahmer, any John Wayne Gacy, or Ted Bundy death tolls.
So, at the risk of sounding a little bit, what's the word, morbid or gross, tell the listeners the method of operation. What did he? And we're assuming this is one person. It could have been, copycat murderers, etc. But what did the scene tell the investigators? What happened in each house?
Well, the killer always used an axe, and sometimes used the blunt end or the pole end of the axe, the flat end, to really just cause a lot of crushing and damage and death, certainly. But the main thing was the axe was always left behind at the crime scene, and the police figured out, early detectives in 1911 and 1912 had figured out and concluded that the killer was traveling by rail across the United States. So why an axe? Why would the killer use an axe? It could have used the killer could have used a gun or a knife. Certainly they had those in 1911. But the thing is, the killer was posing as just a person of leisure traveling by rail, I believe. And then the thing is, all these families were being murdered with their own family axe. In other words, the killer was counting on an axe being at every family home that he visited. And in 1911 and 1912, if you wanted to stay warm, if you wanted to cook on a wood-burning stove, you had a wood pile behind your house and you had an axe ready to go. So the killer, used this and counted on this to, ironically, use the family's axe to murder them in their sleep. And it was always pretty much the same. Families being murdered in their sleep, wholesale. Now, when we think of serial killers, we typically think of people like Dahmer and Gacy and Ted Bundy, who murdered individual victims. But this was, the Axeman was a wholesale killer who killed families.
I never heard that expression before, wholesale murderer or wholesale killing. And you just mean that he would wipe out a whole family by himself.
Right, exactly. In one night, usually in one visitation of the Axeman. And that was a term that actually came from the old newspapers from 1911 and 1912.
Is that right?
What you have to understand is this story was huge. It was a huge headline news story across the United States 100 years ago. In fact, it was on so many front pages in different newspapers across the United States. It was the biggest news story, and everyone was talking about the murders going on in Louisiana and Texas. It was all they were talking about until April of 1912 when the Titanic sunk.
Were the victims? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, and then shortly after the Titanic sunk in April of 1912, then we had the Villisca axe murders. Now, I didn't know anything about. I have to plead ignorance. I didn't know anything about the Villisca axe murders, which are one of the most infamous unsolved crimes in American history. When I first read the reports of the crime scene and the details from that killer and that crime scene, I was shocked. I was amazed. I couldn't believe that this was actually happening on a grand scale across the United States. For some reason, in 1911 and 1912, there were a lot of families who were being murdered in this particular fashion.
Is there a similarity in the families? Any one thing that maybe he was targeting?
Well, in Louisiana, it became a racial because the victims were thought to be one of the killers arrested was an African American woman, a black woman by the name of Clementine Barnabette. And again, if my theory is way off, and if I'm wrong about this being the largest unsolved serial killing in U.S. history, the one thing it does touch on is the first female serial killer in American history, the first black female serial killer probably in world history, and it touches on Clementine Barnabette. But after she was arrested, the crimes continued. So they kept going on. It could have been a group, a network. It talks about the book talks about the Human Five, and everyone who was arrested was someone of a religious nature. The officers, investigators were saying this is the work of a religious fanatic. The people who were arrested in Louisiana were reverends and preachers, and they believed that there was a theory going around that it was this black church out of New Orleans that had affiliation with the Church of the Sacrifice out of New Orleans, which was rumored to have voodoo ties and hoodoo ties of that religious nature, and they were sort of killing off racially impure blacks. In other words, they were killing off what people would use the term mulatto or half black or mixed race families. That's what they were seeing in Texas and Louisiana. But the Moore family in Villisca and other families across the United States, it wasn't a racial. The Axeman killed was an equal opportunity wholesale murderer and one of the most horrific killers.
But why children? I mean, children are the most innocent on the face of this planet, especially the babies.
Yeah, the strange thing about that, there was a man who was a central figure and a main suspect in the Villisca axe murders. His name was Reverend Kelly, and he was a Presbyterian minister. He was actually present on the night that the Moore family were murdered. He was actually visiting the church in Villisca, Iowa, and he watched the children's performance that night. It's very creepy, very eerie.
Really creepy.
And he couldn't sleep. He said that he couldn't sleep in the middle of the night. And he saw a shadow out on the lawn in the night, and it spoke to him. This voice told him to suffer the children unto me. He attributed the voice to be that of God, and the voice that he believed was God, told him to slay utterly, and kill these children. And so he did. Now, this was a man who confessed in court, but never served any time and was never convicted. And I don't want to give too many details away, but it's pretty much all in the book.
Wow, isn't that the craziest thing? Okay, let me take a little break, and we'll be right back. Todd C. Elliott is on the phone. He is the author of the book we're focusing on called Axes of Evil, the true story of the Axeman murders. We'll continue when we come back. This is The Source, WOCA Ocala.
The weather is brought to you by myfwc.com. Safe boating is no accident. We'll see clouds and a few sunny breaks today. It'll be noticeably cooler. Look for a shower in places. Highs ranging from 62 in the northern part of the zone to 74 in the south. Partly cloudy and brisk tonight with a shower in spots along the coast. Lows ranging from 47 well inland to 61 on the beaches. Tomorrow, clouds and breaks of sun and breezy. There may be a shower near the coast with a high of 68 to 72. From the Florida Weather Center, I'm meteorologist Joe Lundberg.
On this episode of What Not to Do, brought to you by
Mike Scott Plumbing. If water runs through it, we do it.
The fire department? Why is the fire department coming up our driveway?
Don't look at me, he's your cousin.
Aha, Mr. Funny Man. What did you do now?
Well, we were attempting to repair the water heater, but somebody forgot to turn off the breaker.
Well, why is there water everywhere?
Apparently the main water shutoff didn't exactly get shut off.
Okay, at what point did you realize you're not a plumber and you need to call Mike Scott Plumbing?
Right about the time we had the flood and the fire all at the same time.
And when should you have called the professionals at Mike Scott Plumbing? That's what I thought. Does water run through it? Then they do it, not you. And don't give me the weekend excuse. You know they don't charge extra for nights, weekends, or holidays. Do you need the number?
No, I got it. 237-2888.
Again.
237-2888.
Why'd you call Cousin Sean anyway? You know he can't even fix his own lunch.
On next week's episode of What Not to Do.
Oh, come on, a monster truck?
Get it for less at the DIY Home Center outlet. Get top quality real wood cabinets the same or less than the big box stores are selling the cheap stuff. And that's not all. Drywall screws big box stores are $6.47 a pound. At DIY, only $4.99. Plus, DIY has the largest selection of mobile home parts and accessories anywhere. From carpet to doors, get the DIY supplies you need for less. The DIY Home Center outlet. We are your building material closeout store. 2191 Northwest 10th Street, just 2 miles east of I-75.
Hi, I'm Seth with AA Lock, Dock, and Security. Have you ever thought about the locks or security on your house or business? Have you ever wondered why the keys to your new car cost so much? Well, at AA Lock, Dock, and Security, we can help with securing your valuables. We can even replace those expensive transponder keys. We can give you the knowledge that no one else will. Call AA Lock, Dock, and Security at 867-1965. That's 867-1965.
Hi, this is JP from Penn Flooring here in Ocala. I would like to invite you to come in and visit our spacious showroom where we have solutions for every style and budget. From wall-to-wall carpet to hardwood floors and tiles, we have an unsurpassed selection of flooring. At Penn Flooring, we've provided quality customer service with a family touch for over 25 years. Visit our website at pennflooring.com or come by our showroom, 1201 Southwest 17th Street, just over the bridge. Penn Flooring, quality customer service with a family touch.
All right, 21 minutes after 11 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in. We are rubbernecking for sure with this book.
Yeah.
We're morbidly curious, I think. Todd C. Elliott is on the phone up in Louisiana, and the story takes place in Louisiana and Texas. It sounds like the murderer it's speculated was traveling, or the murderers, if there was more than one, on a railroad car. And the murders, if you're just tuning in, took place back in 1911 and 1912. Is that right? And Todd, thank you for waiting through the break. You know what I wanted to ask you? When there were little children, I heard Robin talking to you about the little children and how it's upsetting when anybody gets killed. But the children had their fingers held apart by pieces of wood. What was that?
Right, that was written by one newspaper account. And the thing is, when these crimes first started happening, we saw newsmen converge on southwest Louisiana, and thankfully so. In fact, the best coverage that this story had ever received, and with photographic evidence, which is in the book, even the Kindle version, photos that have never been seen before. Thanks to the best story was done by Utica, New York, out of Utica, and he was doing some extensive, investigation. And that's the thing. There was a lot of, when you don't get the truth, sometimes people make it up, and you sort of have to separate truth from fantasy and folklore. But I think that the story, it's something that people haven't wanted to talk about, I think, for 100 years, because it touches on race and religion and murder of children and things like that. But if it hadn't have been for the journalists back then doing the investigative research, this may have just gone, unnoticed through history. But I like to unearth this type of history, is Louisiana history, and now U.S. history.
Yeah, you mentioned Clementine earlier, and you said she was an African American woman. You mentioned Reverend Kelly. Was he also African American?
No. He was a very white man he's from England, and what's sort of ironic is he is one that I believe is the American Jack the Ripper of the 20th century, and he's British. He had arrived in the early turn of the century, and he. He'd been in the federal sort of loony nut bin, the St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Washington, D.C. Yeah.
But he went to court. He actually admitted to it, but I'm confused. He admitted to it, but didn't go to jail for it?
He did, and the Attorney General for the state of Iowa was convinced, without a doubt, that Kelly was the killer. I mean, Kelly had blood on clothing that he had turned into a laundry to get it dry cleaned or something back then, and he had spoke about the murders on the train that morning as he left town after the murders.
Oh my goodness!
Very suspect, and for some reason, I attributed his never being convicted to his involvement in possibly, being a Freemason. He was a Freemason, that's confirmed, and there are really no records of him. I'm still looking actually for records of him, being in the South at the time. There's one thing, though. There's one thing that points to Kelly was in the South at that time. There's a book, the only book that he had ever written, and it's actually in a library in Texas, and right now. And so that, just here we go. It shows that Kelly somehow some connection to Texas. Somehow his book ended up in a Texas library.
Oh, wow.
He must have been financially sound then to be able to travel from town to town on the train and also make the return trips to the previous towns to commit more murders.
I don't know if he was. Dr. Epperly, Ed Epperly, who's an expert in the Villisca axe murders, didn't think that he didn't have a lot of money, but it never stopped him from traveling. For some reason, even though he was maybe financially strapped for cash, he always seemed to find a way to travel. It could have been because he traveled with his wife. I don't think she had money either, but he could have traveled as a Presbyterian minister because that's what he was. And there could have been something back then that he could have traveled the rail as a.
I gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah, sort of a, and a lot of the victims we see across the country turned up to be railroad workers and things like that. Just people that he might happen across as a. And then one thing I noticed as well, there's sort of a snowbird factor that's involved. All the killings that you see in the South occurred during the winter, and all the murders up north occurred during the summer months. So this was someone who was a person of leisure, who was traveling as a passenger, never brought the axe on the train because he didn't need to. The axe was always waiting at the home. And this was someone passing themselves off as a good person, just an average citizen.
Gosh.
Did she suspect anything, the wife, and did he have children?
He didn't. They didn't have children, but I think she knew. She came to his defense and really put forth the idea that he had confessed to not all the crimes. He only confessed to Villisca. That he confessed to the axe murders in Villisca under duress. But she, I think, knew more than let on. I almost think that they were maybe some sick, twisted couple. But, the thing is, when we often think about the good old days, we think, 1911, pre-World War I, certainly we didn't have homicidal maniacs, but we did. And, I like to point out that you can't blame it on video games or movies
That's
or
right.
television or,
Good point.
or rock
Yeah.
music.
And you know what else I was thinking you really can't blame it on? You can't blame it on the desire for fame. I mean, you might be able to make that argument, but not like you can today. I mean, today you do something, you're all over the world by tonight.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one thing. I think technology nowadays, we could probably nip a serial killer in the bud a lot quicker than we were able to before. But back then, certainly, and this fear was gripping. Just imagine if someone was traveling from town to town today, killing entire families in their sleep.
Oh, I don't want to imagine that. I think we call them ISIS is what we call them today.
Yes.
Well, exactly. See, I mean, there's a fundamental extremism in what Kelly was doing. I mean,
yeah.
The police believed that he was a religious fanatic, and again, this was turn of the century, and here we are. We're turn of the century people. We've witnessed the beginning of a new century, much like the victims and the people who were around back then. So I think it's an interesting relation how we can draw a parallel there.
The book is called Axes of Evil: The True Story of the Axeman Murders. Todd C. Elliott is the author. I have a copy. If you want it, call me right now, and you can have it. The number is 622-9622. The rest of us have to get it. I heard you mention that it's available on Kindle, so we'll start there. It's on Amazon, obviously. Do you have a website?
Yes, I'm experimenting with the social media with Facebook this time around. So Facebook.com/TheAxesOfEvil. Facebook.com/TheAxesOfEvilBook. The Axes of Evil book. You can check for hashtags and things like that. But you could send me a message too. And if you send me proof of purchase, if you buy the Kindle edition today, I'll actually send you a signed copy of my first book on the JFK assassination, which has a lot to do with Louisiana history as well.
Yeah, that's. Wow. I was looking at that a little bit. Not the book itself, but I was reading about the book. Obviously, another good one. Todd, thank you for being on the air with us today. And I don't know, you made a really good case. It really sounds like you figured this one out.
I hope so. But there's still an element of mystery there.
Did Clementine what's her name, did she get sentenced? And I mean, was her whole life ruined, or did she go free?
She did. She ended up dying in Angola prison in Louisiana, but there are no records. 100 years ago in Louisiana, I mean, we just didn't have that sort of record-keeping capability back then. But unfortunately, I think there's also a great injustice. I think people can see a great injustice if she was lying, if she was not telling the truth. But she did confess to 17 murders.
Okay. Well, then never mind.
Gee.
I thought she was totally innocent. Well, thank you, Todd. Thank you for being on the air with us, and you're welcome back anytime.
I'd love to be back. Thanks for having me.
All right, you're welcome. We'll take a little break. We'll be right back.
Fox News Radio, I'm Lillian Wu. Police in Israel say a Palestinian has carried out an attack with his car.
The man drove his vehicle up onto the curb outside a border police station in East Jerusalem, hitting 7 people.
Fox's John Huddy. He then reportedly stabbed one person before being stopped. In Kentucky,